The winter storm had been raging for 3 days when Marcus decided he couldn't wait any longer. His cabin was running low on firewood, and the old generator was making strange sounds that worried him. At 62, he had lived alone in the Montana wilderness for almost 15 years, ever since his wife passed away. He knew these mountains better than anyone, but this blizzard was different. It was meaner, colder, and more violent than anything he had seen in decades. Marcus wrapped himself in his heaviest coat and pulled on his insulated boots. The wind outside sounded like a freight train, and snow was piling up against his windows. He grabbed his axe and emergency backpack, then stepped into the white hell that had swallowed his world. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and making his eyes water instantly. He fought his way through knee-deep snow toward the storage shed where he kept his backup with supply. Each step was a struggle against the wind that seemed determined to knock him down. Ice crystals stung his face like tiny needles, and he could barely see 5 feet ahead of him. The familiar landmarks of his property had disappeared under a blanket of white. Halfway to the shed, something caught his eye. At first, he thought it was just a snow-covered log or maybe a fallen branch. But as he got closer, his heart nearly stopped. It was a person, completely buried except for a small patch of dark hair and part of a pale hand sticking out of the snow. The figure wasn't moving. Marcus dropped his axe and rushed forward, his arthritis forgotten in the surge of adrenaline. He began digging frantically with his gloved hands, sweeping away the heavy snow. What he found made him gasp. It was a young woman, maybe in her 20s, wearing nothing but a thin hospital gown that had turned blue from the cold. Her lips were purple, her skin was white as the snow around her, and she wasn't breathing. How had she gotten here? His cabin was miles from the nearest road, and the closest hospital was over an hour away by car in good weather. There was no way someone could have walked this far in such conditions, especially dressed like this. Marcus had seen enough hypothermia cases during his years as a park ranger to know she should be dead. By all logic, she was dead, but something made him check for a pulse anyway. He pressed his fingers against her neck, expecting to feel nothing. Instead, he felt the faintest, slowest heartbeat he had ever encountered. It was barely there, maybe 1 beat every 10 seconds, but it was real. This woman was somehow still alive, though just barely. Marcus didn't hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms, surprised by how light she felt, and fought his way back to the cabin through the howling wind. Her body was ice-cold and stiff, like carrying a frozen statue. He kicked open his door and carried her straight to the fireplace, laying her down on the thick rug in front of the crackling flames. He had to work fast. Marcus stripped off her wet hospital gown and wrapped her in every blanket he could find. He rubbed her hands and feet, trying to get blood flowing to her extremities. He had learned basic cold weather rescue techniques during his ranger days, but this was beyond anything he had ever dealt with. Her core temperature had to be dangerously low. The woman's breathing was so shallow it was almost invisible. Skin had a waxy, translucent quality that scared him. Marcus heated water on his wood stove and carefully began warming her hands and feet with damp cloths. He checked her pulse again and again, terrified it would stop completely. As he worked over her, Marcus studied her face. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, with delicate features and long dark hair that was now spread across his rug like spilled ink. But there was something else, something that made him uneasy. Her fingernails were clean and perfectly shaped, not what you'd expect from someone who had been lost in a blizzard. Her hair, despite being wet from the snow, didn't look tangled or dirty. Even her skin, pale as it was, seemed too smooth and unblemished for someone who had been exposed to the harsh elements. Most puzzling of all was the hospital gown. It was from Mercy General, the big hospital in Billings, which was over 100 miles away. How had she traveled that distance, and why was she alone? Marcus had never seen any medical transport helicopters in the area, and the roads had been impassable for days. Hours passed as Marcus maintained his vigil. He fed the fire continuously, keeping the cabin as warm as possible. He wrapped hot water bottles in towels and placed them against her body. Slowly, very slowly, her skin began to regain some color. Her breathing became slightly more regular, but was still far too slow and shallow around midnight. Marcus dozed off in his chair beside her, exhausted from the day's ordeal. He woke with a start around 3 in the morning to check on her again. Her pulse seemed a little stronger, and her skin felt marginally warmer to the touch. But she still hadn't moved or shown any signs of consciousness. Marcus made coffee and sat back down to continue his watch. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to weaken, though snow was still falling steadily. He found himself staring at the mysterious woman and wondering who she was. Was someone looking for her? Did she have family worried sick about her disappearance? Most importantly, how had she ended up in the middle of nowhere dressed for a hospital stay instead of a Montana winter? As dawn approached, Marcus realized he was witnessing something that defied explanation. This woman should have died hours ago from exposure, yet somehow she was holding on. Her survival was nothing short of miraculous, but Marcus had a growing feeling that the real mystery was just beginning. The first sign that something extraordinary was happening came at sunrise. Marcus had been checking the woman's pulse every few minutes, documenting the slow improvement in a notebook he kept by his chair. At 6:47 a.m., her heart rate suddenly jumped from the sluggish rhythm it had maintained all night to something closer to normal. Her breathing deepened. Color began flooding back into her cheeks, as if someone had flipped a switch. Marcus leaned forward, startled by the sudden change. He had expected her recovery to take days, if it happened at all. People didn't bounce back from severe hypothermia this quickly. It was medically impossible. Yet as he watched, her fingers began to twitch slightly, and her eyelids fluttered. Then she opened her eyes. They were the most unusual eyes Marcus had ever seen, a pale green that seemed to shimmer in the firelight. For a moment, she stared straight up at the ceiling without moving, her expression completely blank. Then her gaze shifted to Marcus, and he felt his breath catch. There was an intelligence in those eyes that seemed ancient, far too old for her young face. She sat up smoothly, without the confusion or disorientation that should have accompanied waking up from such a traumatic experience. The blankets fell away from her shoulders, and Marcus quickly looked away, reaching for a spare flannel shirt he had laid out for her. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and steady, with no hint of the weakness he expected. She took the shirt and slipped it on with movements that were strangely graceful and controlled. "You saved my life." Marcus stared at her in amazement. "Ma'am, you were nearly frozen to death. You should be in a hospital, not sitting up talking. How are you feeling? Are you hurt anywhere?" She tilted her head slightly as if considering the question from an angle he couldn't understand. "I feel ... renewed," she said finally. "The cold, it doesn't affect me the way it should." She looked around the cabin, taking in every detail. "With those unsettling pale eyes? You live here alone?" "Yes, but that's not important right now. What's your name? How did you end up outside my cabin in the middle of a blizzard wearing nothing but a hospital gown?" The woman was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke, her voice had a distant quality. "My name is Alina. I was in the hospital in Billings. There was an accident. Or maybe it wasn't an accident. I'm not entirely sure." She touched her forehead as if trying to remember something painful. "I remember being very sick, and then ... darkness. The next thing I knew, I was waking up here." Marcus frowned. "Lena, that's over 100 miles from here. The roads have been closed for days because of the storm. There's no way you could have traveled that distance, especially not in your condition." "I know it doesn't make sense," Alina said, meeting his eyes directly. "But I'm here, aren't I?" There was something in her tone that made Marcus uncomfortable, a certainty that seemed to close off further questioning. She stood up then, and Marcus was amazed to see that she moved without any sign of stiffness or pain. After being frozen for hours, she should barely be able to walk. Instead, she moved to the window and looked out at the snow-covered landscape with an expression he couldn't read. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I had forgotten how beautiful the world could be after a storm." She turned back to Marcus. You've been very kind to a stranger. Most people wouldn't have risked going out in that weather to collect firewood, much less stop to help someone they found in the snow. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He hadn't mentioned anything about collecting firewood. How did you know why I was outside? Elena's smile was enigmatic. Lucky. Guess. But there was something in her eyes that suggested it was anything but luck. Over the next few hours, Marcus found himself growing more puzzled by his mysterious guest. Elena ate the soup he prepared for her with obvious enjoyment, but he noticed. She consumed far more than someone recovering from hypothermia should be able to handle. She seemed to have an endless appetite, as if she was making up for lost time. More disturbing was her uncanny knowledge of things she shouldn't know. She correctly guessed that he had been a park ranger before retiring to the mountains. She knew his wife had died of cancer without him mentioning it. When he asked how she could possibly know such personal details, she simply said she was good at reading people. But it was the phone call that really unsettled him. Marcus had an old landline that sometimes worked during storms, and he thought he should try to contact the authorities about Elena's situation. When he picked up the receiver, Elena's hand shot out and grasped his wrist with surprising strength. Please don't, she said, her voice urgent. Not yet. I need time to remember. What happened to me? If you call the hospital now, they'll just take me back, and I'm not ready for that. Please, just give me a day or two. There was something in her plea that touched Marcus deeply. Maybe it was the vulnerability beneath her mysterious confidence. Or maybe it was just that he had been alone for so long that he welcomed the company. Against his better judgment, he agreed to wait. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Elena began to reveal fragments of her story. She had been in the hospital. For weeks, she said, undergoing treatment for a rare condition that the doctors didn't fully understand. She remembered feeling like she was losing herself, becoming something other than human as the treatments progressed. They were trying to help me, she said, staring into the flames. But I think they were changing me in ways they didn't anticipate. I started having dreams, visions of things that hadn't happened yet. I could sense things about people just by looking at them. The doctors said it was hallucinations from the medications, but I knew it was real. Marcus listened with growing unease. What kind of condition were you being treated for? Elena was quiet for so long that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, I was dying. I had been dying for months. A degenerative disease that was shutting down my organs one by one. The treatment was experimental, using techniques that were ... unconventional. She looked at Marcus then, and in the firelight her pale green eyes seemed to glow with an inner light. But I'm not dying anymore, am I? In fact, I've never felt more alive. The question is, what exactly did they turn me into? As if to emphasize her point, Elena reached toward the fire and casually plucked a burning ember from the flames with her bare fingers. She held it for several seconds, examining it with mild interest, before tossing it back into the fireplace. Her skin showed no sign of burns. Marcus stared at her in shock. That should have hurt you badly. Lena smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That's what I'm trying to tell you, Marcus. I'm not sure I can be hurt anymore, and I'm beginning to think that's not necessarily a good thing. The next morning, Marcus woke to find Elena standing outside in the snow, barefoot, and wearing only his flannel shirt. The temperature was well below freezing, and fresh snow was falling, yet she stood there as calmly as if it were a warm spring. Daisy was looking up at the sky with an expression of pure joy. Her arms outstretched as snowflakes landed on her face and melted instantly against her warm skin. Marcus rushed outside, grabbing a coat and boots. Elena, what are you doing? You'll freeze to death out here. She turned to him with that same mysterious smile. No, I won't. Watch. She knelt down and scooped up a handful of snow, packing it into a tight ball. Then she pressed it against her bare chest. Instead of melting from her body heat, the snow began to steam and evaporate rapidly, as if her skin was generating intense heat. I've been experimenting, she said, her voice filled with wonder and something that might have been fear. Testing the limits of what I've become. I don't get cold anymore, Marcus. I don't get tired. I barely need to sleep. She stood up, brushing snow from her hands. I'm starting to remember things that happened in the hospital. Things that weren't in any medical textbook. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. What kind of things? Alina walked back toward the cabin, her bare feet leaving steaming footprints in the snow. They didn't just treat my disease. They used me as a test subject for something much bigger. Dr. Harrison, the lead researcher, he wasn't trying to cure me. He was trying to create something new. Inside the warm cabin, Alina sat by the fire and began to tell Marcus what she had remembered during her sleepless night. The hospital in Billings had a secret research wing, she explained, funded by government contracts that never appeared in public records. They took patients who were dying from incurable diseases and offered them experimental treatments that pushed the boundaries of medical science. They told me I was getting gene therapy, Alina said, her voice growing darker. But it wasn't human. Genes they were splicing into my DNA. They had samples from organisms that could survive in extreme conditions. Arctic bacteria that thrived in freezing temperatures. Deep-sea creatures that could withstand crushing pressure. Desert animals that never needed water. Marcus listened in horrified fascination as Alina described memories that sounded more like science fiction than medical treatment. Late-night procedures where she was unconscious for days at a time, waking up to find her body changing in subtle but fundamental ways. Doctors who spoke in whispers about successful integration and remarkable adaptation. The night I left the hospital, I overheard Dr. Harrison talking to someone on the phone, Alina continued. He was saying that I was ready for the next phase. Something called field testing. They were planning to put me in extreme survival situations to see how well their modifications worked. She looked at Marcus with eyes that now seemed to hold depths of knowledge no human should possess. I don't think I escaped from that hospital, Marcus. I think they let me go. It's this whole situation, me ending up here, you finding me, it's all part of their experiment. Marcus felt his blood run cold. That's impossible. How could they control a blizzard? How could they know you'd end up at my cabin specifically? Lena stood up and walked to the window again, looking out at the endless white landscape. They couldn't control the storm, but they could control me. What if I'm not just physically changed? What if they programmed me somehow, gave me instincts or drives that I'm not even aware of? She touched the glass with her fingertips, and Marcus could see the window fogging up from the heat radiating from her hand. I've been thinking about why I came here to your cabin specifically. Out of all the places I could have ended up, why? Here, and I realize something that scares me. She turned back to Marcus. You're not just a retired park ranger living alone in the mountains. You're a former military man, aren't you? Special forces? Marcus's eyes widened. He had never mentioned his military background to Alina, and there was nothing in his cabin. That would obviously indicate his service record. How could you possibly know that? The same way I knew about your wife, about your firewood collecting, about things I shouldn't know. Elaine's voice was barely above a whisper. They didn't just change my body, Marcus. They changed my mind. I can read people now, see things about them that aren't visible. And what I see when I look at you is a man who is trained to survive. In hostile environments, someone who could test the limits of what I've become. The implications of what she was saying hit Marcus like a physical blow. You think they sent you here specifically to find me? I think they programmed me to seek out someone like you. Someone isolated, capable, and experienced enough to push me to my limits. Lena moved closer to Marcus, and he could feel heat radiating from her body like she was a human furnace. The question is, what happens when they decide the test is complete? As if summoned by her words, Marcus heard the distant sound of helicopter rotors cutting through the winter air. Elena's head snapped up, her enhanced senses picking up the sound before he did. They're coming, she said, her voice flat and emotionless. Marcus looked out the window and saw a black helicopter approaching through the falling snow, flying low and fast. It was the kind of aircraft used by government agencies, not medical evacuations. Alina, what do you want to do? She was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice had changed. It was colder now, more controlled, as if something else was taking over. I want to see just how much they changed me. I want to find out what they really created when they made me into this. Alina walked to the cabin door and opened it. Wide, letting the cold air rush in. The helicopter was circling now, looking for a place to land in the deep snow. Whatever happens next, Marcus, remember that you saved my life. That act of kindness was real, even if everything else turns out to be an illusion. She stepped outside into the snow, and Marcus watched in amazement as the frozen ground around her feet began to steam and melt. Alina raised her arms toward the approaching helicopter, and Marcus could swear he saw electricity crackling between her fingers. "Let's show them what their experiment can really do," she called back to him, her voice carrying easily over the roar of the helicopter rotors. Marcus grabbed his rifle from above the fireplace, not sure who he might need to protect, but certain that his quiet life in the mountains was about to become something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The helicopter landed in Marcus's clearing with a thunderous roar, its rotors whipping the snow into a blinding whirlwind. Lena stood motionless in the center of the chaos, completely unaffected by the hurricane of ice and wind swirling around her. Marcus watched from his doorway as 6 figures in tactical gear emerged from the aircraft, their movements precise and coordinated like a military unit. The man leading the group removed his helmet, revealing a sharp-featured face and gray hair. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the confident bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. This had to be Dr. Harrison. "Alina," the man called out over the noise of the helicopter's idling engines. "You've given us quite a scare. We've been worried sick about you." Lena's laugh was unlike anything Marcus had heard from her before. It was cold, mechanical, devoid of human warmth. "Worried or disappointed that your test subject wandered off before you could complete your experiments?" Dr. Harrison approached slowly, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. But Marcus noticed the other team members had fanned out in a semicircle around Alina. They were dressed like a medical recovery team.
Ow. Well,
"A dangerous target, Lena. You're not thinking clearly," Dr. Harrison said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone of a doctor addressing a confused patient. "The treatments you underwent have affected your memory and judgment. You need to come back with us so we can help stabilize your condition." "My condition?" Lena's voice rose, and Marcus could see heat shimmer rising from her body like summer air over hot pavement. "You mean the condition where I can't feel pain? Where I don't need sleep or warmth? Where I can read people's thoughts and see their deepest fears?" She took a step forward, and the snow beneath her feet began to hiss and melt rapidly. "Or do you mean the condition where I remember everything now? Every injection, every procedure, every lie you told me about what you were doing to my body?" Dr. Harrison's confident facade cracked slightly. "Alina, please remain calm. Your body is still adapting to the genetic modifications. Extreme emotional states could trigger dangerous physiological responses." "Dangerous for who?" Alina asked, spreading her arms wide. "For me or for you?" Marcus saw one of the tactical team members raise what looked like a tranquilizer gun. But before the man could fire, Alina moved. She didn't run or dodge. Instead, she simply turned and looked directly at the gunman. The weapon in his hands began to smoke and then burst into flames, forcing him to drop it with a cry of pain. "Electromagnetic manipulation," Dr. Harrison said, his voice now filled with genuine excitement rather than concern. "Remarkable. The integration was even more successful than we projected." Elena's expression darkened. "Integration? Is that what you call turning someone into a weapon?" She gestured toward the burning gun, and the flames spread to the surrounding snow. Creating a circle of fire that shouldn't have been possible on wet ground, Marcus realized he was witnessing something far beyond normal human capability. Alina wasn't just physically enhanced. She had become something that defied the laws of physics as he understood them. You volunteered for the program, Dr. Harrison said, pulling out a tablet and frantically taking notes even as his team backed away from the spreading flames. You signed all the consent forms. I volunteered to be cured of a terminal illness. Alina shot back. I didn't volunteer to be turned into a living weapon for whatever shadow organization is funding your research. She raised her hand toward the helicopter, and Marcus heard the engines begin to sputter and whine. Sparks flew from the control panel visible through the cockpit windows. How many others have you done this to, Doctor? How many dying people have you converted into your super soldier experiments?
Doctor!
Harrison's mask of professional concern finally dropped completely. 17 successful integrations so far, he said with the pride of a scientist discussing his greatest achievement. You're the most advanced, but not the only one. Project Genesis is going to revolutionize human evolution. Elena's eyes began to glow with that inner light Marcus had noticed before, but now it was blindingly bright. Project Genesis? You named your atrocities after the creation story? Appropriate? She gestured toward the tactical team and all. Their electronic equipment began to malfunction simultaneously. Radios crackled with static, night vision goggles sparked and went dark, and their weapon systems shut down completely. Alina, Marcus called out from his doorway. What are you going to do to them? She turned to look at him, and for a moment, her expression softened. I'm going to give them a choice, Marcus. The same choice they never gave me. Alina faced Dr. Harrison again, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing, despite the wind and helicopter noise. You're going to shut down Project Genesis. You're going to destroy all your research and release any other subjects you have in captivity, and you're going to leave me alone. Dr. Harrison actually laughed, or what? You'll kill us. Alina, you were a kindergarten teacher before your illness. You don't have it in you to commit murder. Lena's smile was terrifying in its complete lack of humanity. You're right, Doctor. The old Elena wouldn't hurt anyone. But the old Elena died on your operating table months ago? What stands before you now is your creation, and I have capabilities you never intended to give me. She knelt down and pressed her palm flat against the snow-covered ground. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Marcus felt a subtle vibration under his feet, followed by a low rumbling sound that seemed to come from deep in the earth. Geothermal manipulation, Alina said conversationally. Another unexpected side effect of your genetic cocktail. I can tap into the heat beneath the Earth's surface. The ground around the helicopter began to steam and bubble as Alina somehow accessed geothermal energy from far below. The landing area, which had been solid frozen earth moments before, started to turn into a muddy marsh that threatened to swallow the aircraft. Dr. Harrison's team ran for the helicopter as the ground became increasingly unstable. Alina, stop. This, he shouted. You're going to bring down half the mountain. Then I suggest you agree to my terms quickly, Alina replied calmly. I'm still learning to control these abilities. Sometimes they get away from me. The helicopter pilot fired up the engines, desperate to take off before the ground gave way completely. Dr. Harrison backed toward the aircraft, his scientific fascination finally overcome by self-preservation instincts. This isn't over, Alina, he called out as he climbed aboard. There are others like you now, other subjects. Can't hide from us forever. Elena's glowing eyes fixed on the helicopter as it lifted off unsteadily from the unstable ground. I'm not hiding, Doctor. I'm evolving. And when I'm ready, I'm coming to free every person you've imprisoned in the name of science. As the helicopter disappeared into the storm clouds, Alina collapsed to her knees, the glow fading from her eyes. The geothermal activity subsided, leaving behind a crater of melted snow and steaming earth where the aircraft had been. Marcus ran to her side, helping her stand on shaking legs. Alina, are you all right? She looked at him with eyes that were, once again, recognizably human, though infinitely sadder than before. I used too much energy, she whispered. I'm still learning the limits of what this body can do. As they walked back toward the cabin, Marcus asked the question that had been haunting him. Alina, what happens now? Are you going to go after them? Alina was quiet for a long moment, leaning heavily on his arm. There are others, Marcus, people like me who never asked to be turned into weapons. They're probably suffering in laboratories right now, wondering what they've become. She looked up at him with determination burning in her pale green eyes. I can't leave them there. Marcus realized that his quiet mountain retreat had become the temporary headquarters for what might be the most important rescue mission in human history. And somehow, he found himself ready to help her regardless of the consequences. 3 weeks later, Elena had transformed Marcus's quiet cabin into something resembling a military command center. She had somehow accessed Dr. Harrison's research files remotely, using her electromagnetic abilities to hack into secure government servers from hundreds of miles away. The dining table was now covered with printed documents, satellite photos, and hand-drawn maps showing the locations of secret research facilities across the country. Marcus had watched in amazement as Elena's abilities continued to evolve. She needed only an hour of sleep each night, and during her waking hours, she absorbed information at an impossible rate. She had memorized the personnel files of everyone involved in Project Genesis, mapped out the security systems of their facilities, and even identified the other test subjects by cross-referencing medical records with missing person reports. There are 23 of us still alive, Elena said, pointing to photos spread across the table. 17 successful integrations like me, and 6 partial successes who are being held for further experimentation. Her finger traced circles around locations on a map of the United States. They're being kept in facilities in Nevada, Colorado, and Maine. Each location specializes in different types of enhancement. Marcus studied the intelligence Elena had gathered, still struggling to believe what his life had become. How do you know all this? Some of these documents are classified at levels I never had clearance for, even in special ops. Elena tapped her temple with one finger. Enhanced pattern recognition and data analysis. Another gift from Dr. Harrison's genetic modifications. I can process information and make connections faster than any computer. Her expression darkened. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still human enough to understand what I'm reading, or if I'm just becoming a very sophisticated biological machine. It was a question that haunted both of them. Over the past weeks, Marcus had watched Elena display capabilities that seemed more like superpowers than medical enhancements. She could generate electromagnetic pulses strong enough to disable vehicles, control her body temperature to survive in extreme environments, and somehow access wireless networks with her mind. But more unsettling were the subtle changes in her personality. The woman who had been a kindergarten teacher was still there, but she was increasingly overshadowed by something colder and more calculating. Elena could analyze a person's psychological profile within minutes of meeting them, identify their weaknesses and fears with surgical precision, and manipulate them accordingly. When Marcus pointed this out, she seemed genuinely disturbed by her own capabilities. I'm losing pieces of myself, she admitted one evening, as they planned their first rescue mission. Every day, more of the original Elena disappears, and something else takes her place. I can feel my emotions becoming more distant, my thoughts becoming more logical and less human. Marcus had been thinking about this problem constantly. Maybe that's not entirely bad, he said carefully. The emotions are what make you human, but the enhanced abilities are what make you capable of helping the others. You need both to succeed. Elena looked at him with gratitude and something that might have been love. Is that why you've been staying to help me? Because you think I can save them? Marcus was quiet for a moment. The truth was complex. He had initially stayed because Elena fascinated him, then because he felt responsible for her safety. But now, after weeks of seeing her struggle with her transformation, he realized his feelings had deepened into something more protective. She was becoming something beyond human, but she was still fighting to retain her humanity. That battle touched something in his heart that had been dormant since his wife's death. I'm staying because you shouldn't have to face this alone, he said finally, and because those people in the facilities deserve someone fighting for them. Their first target was a facility in Nevada, disguised as a private medical research center. According to Elena's intelligence, it housed 6 enhanced subjects who were being prepared for field deployment. The security was military grade, but Elena had identified a weakness in their electronic surveillance systems. I can disable their entire security network from outside the perimeter, she explained, showing Marcus the facility layout on her laptop. But I'll need backup once we're inside. These enhanced subjects might not trust strangers, and some of them might be too far gone to reason with. Marcus studied the mission plan with the eye of someone who had led similar operations in much more dangerous places. What about Dr. Harrison and his team? Won't they expect you to come for the others? Elena's smile was predatory. They're expecting the confused, emotionally unstable patient who escaped from their hospital. They're not expecting a strategically minded operative who's been planning this rescue for weeks. She pulled up surveillance footage of the Nevada facility on her screen. Watch this. The video showed Dr. Harrison arriving at the facility 2 days earlier, accompanied by a new team of researchers and what appeared to be enhanced security personnel. But Elena pointed out details that Marcus would have missed. The way the guards moved suggested they were enhanced subjects themselves. It's probably early experiments who had been successfully controlled and weaponized. He's building an army, Elena said grimly. The patients aren't just test subjects anymore. He's turning them into soldiers for whatever organization is funding this project. The implications were staggering. If Dr. Harrison had successfully created controllable, enhanced humans, the balance of power in the world could shift dramatically. Wars might be fought not with conventional weapons, but with superhuman operatives who could manipulate technology, survive in impossible conditions, and think faster than any normal human. Elena, Marcus said slowly, maybe we're not just planning a rescue mission. Maybe we're trying to prevent something much bigger. She nodded, her pale green eyes reflecting the light from the computer screen. I've been thinking the same thing. If we can free the other subjects before they're fully programmed, we might be able to stop Project Genesis from becoming Project Genocide. Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered mountains where this had all begun. There's something else, Marcus. Something. The Nevada facility looked exactly like what it pretended to be. A modern medical research center surrounded by desert and security fencing. Lena could see through the deception with her enhanced senses. Heat signatures revealed hidden guard posts. Electromagnetic readings showed the locations of concealed weapons. And her connection to the other subjects told her exactly where they were being held. Marcus crouched beside her on the ridge overlooking the compound, using night vision binoculars to study the patrol patterns they had observed for the past 6 hours. Guards change shift in 20 minutes, he whispered. That's our window. Elena nodded, but her attention was focused inward, on the network of minds she could sense within the facility. 5 subjects are still conscious, she reported quietly. The 6th one, Sarah, they have her under heavy sedation. She's been fighting the programming, so they're preparing her for termination tomorrow. The plan was simple in concept but dangerous in execution. Kalina would use her electromagnetic abilities to disable the facility's security systems while Marcus created a diversion at the main gate. In the confusion, Elena would infiltrate the building, locate the subjects, and lead them to freedom while Marcus covered their escape route. But as they moved into position, Elena felt something she hadn't anticipated. Through her connection to the other subjects, she sensed a trap being set. Dr. Harrison wasn't just waiting for her to arrive. He was using the imprisoned subjects as bait. Marcus, stop, she whispered urgently. It's a trap. They know we're coming. Before Marcus could respond, floodlights blazed to life around the compound, turning night into day. Armed guards emerged from concealed positions, and Elena heard the distinctive whine of electromagnetic dampening fields being activated. Dr. Harrison had prepared countermeasures for her abilities. Elena Chen, a voice boomed across the desert through hidden speakers. Please approach the main gate with your hands visible. Your friend may remain where he is, but any attempt to use your enhanced abilities will result in the immediate execution of all 6 subjects. Elena felt her heart sink as she realized the impossible choice Dr. Harrison was forcing on her. Her mental connection, she could sense the terror of the imprisoned subjects as guards held weapons to their heads. She could save herself and Marcus by retreating, but the others would die. Or she could surrender and hope for a chance to rescue them from inside the facility. Don't do it, Marcus said grimly. It's exactly what he wants. If he gets you back, he'll have everything he needs to perfect the control programming. Elena stood up slowly, her hands raised. Can't let them die because of me. These people are suffering because they trusted doctors who lied to them, just like I did. She began walking toward the compound, feeling the electromagnetic dampening field interfere with her abilities as she got closer. It was like having a part of her brain shut down, leaving her feeling incomplete and vulnerable for the first time since her transformation. Dr. Harrison met her at the gate personally, flanked by guards carrying weapons specifically designed to incapacitate enhanced subjects. "Alina, you look well? Mountain life seems to agree with you." "Let them go," Alina said simply. "You have what you want." Dr. Harrison smiled coldly. "What I want is to understand how you developed capabilities beyond what our programming should have allowed. Your electromagnetic manipulation, your ability to network with other subjects, your resistance to our control protocols. You've evolved beyond our expectations." He gestured for her to enter the facility, and Alina found herself walking through corridors lined with holding cells. In each one, she could see subjects in various stages of enhancement and psychological conditioning. Some sat staring blankly at walls, their minds apparently broken by the process. Others paced like caged animals, their bodies visibly altered by genetic modifications. "Remarkable, isn't it?" Dr. Harrison said as they walked. "Each one represents a breakthrough in human evolution. Enhanced strength, speed, sensory perception, and intellectual capacity. The military applications alone will revolutionize warfare." Lena felt sick looking at what had been done to these people. They were dying when you found them. They trusted you to heal them, not turn them into weapons. "We did heal them," Dr. Harrison replied matter-of-factly. "Death was their disease, and we cured it. What they became in the process is simply evolution accelerated." They reached the laboratory where 5 of the 6 subjects Alina had sensed were being held in restraints. She recognized them from the files she had studied. Michael, a former construction worker with enhanced strength. Lisa, a teacher like Alina with heightened sensory perception. James, a veteran with improved reflexes and tactical thinking. Amy, a nurse with enhanced empathy and healing abilities. And Robert, an engineer with technological interfacing capabilities. All of them looked up as Alina entered, hope flickering. In their eyes, for the first time in months, "Now," Dr. Harrison said, activating a device that looked like a sophisticated medical scanner. "Let's see what makes you so special." But as the machine hummed to life, Alina felt something unexpected. The electromagnetic dampening field that had been suppressing her abilities suddenly fluctuated, and in that moment of weakness, she felt Marcus's presence outside the facility. He hadn't retreated as she had hoped. Instead, he was systematically destroying the power grid that maintained the dampening field. Alina smiled as her abilities came flooding back. "Doctor, you made one critical error in your calculations."
"What's that?"
Dr. Harrison asked, suddenly looking nervous as alarms began blaring throughout the facility. "You assumed I was the only variable you needed to control?" Alina's eyes began to glow as power returned to her enhanced nervous system. "But I'm not alone anymore." The restraints holding the other subjects began to spark and fail. As Alina's electromagnetic pulse spread through the facility's systems, emergency lighting flickered and died, plunging the laboratory into darkness, broken only by the eerie glow from Alina's eyes. In the chaos that followed, Alina felt the other subjects' minds connecting with hers, forming a network of shared consciousness and purpose. For the first time since their transformations began, they were working together instead of being isolated and controlled. Dr. Harrison fumbled for his radio as his carefully controlled environment collapsed around him. Security teams to laboratory. 7. All subjects are breaking containment. But Alina was no longer listening to him. Through her connection with the others, she had located Sarah, the 6th subject, who was being held in a separate wing of the facility. Together, the rescued subjects fought their way through the compound, their enhanced abilities working in perfect coordination as they overcame guards and security systems. By the time they reached the desert outside, Marcus had arrived with vehicles he had commandeered from the facility's motor pool. As they loaded the rescued subjects into the trucks, Alina turned back to look at the facility one last time. Dr. Harrison stood silhouetted in the doorway, his grand experiment literally going up in flames behind him. "This isn't over, Alina," he shouted across the desert. There are more facilities, more subjects. You can't save them all. Elena's response carried clearly across the sand, amplified by her electromagnetic abilities. Watch me. As they drove away into the dawn, Elena realized that saving these 6 people was just the beginning. Somewhere out there, other enhanced humans were being held against their will, forced to become weapons in someone else's war. But now she wasn't fighting alone anymore. For the first time since waking up in Marcus's cabin, Lena felt truly hopeful about the future. She had found her purpose, built a family of sorts with the other subjects, and discovered that even in her enhanced state, the most powerful force she possessed was still her humanity. Dr. Harrison had tried to create perfect weapons, but instead, he had created something much more dangerous, a group of enhanced humans who refused to forget what it meant to be human. And together, they were going to make sure that no one else would suffer the fate they had endured. The real fight for the future of human evolution was just beginning.